When the Nordiques traded Eric Lindros to two teams in the span of 2 hours, he was called to testify before an arbitrator at a Montreal hotel to determine which trade would stand. Would it be the one made on June 20th at 10:30 in the morning that sent Lindros to the Flyers, or the one made an hour and 20 minutes later that sent Lindros to the Rangers? A group of reporters was waiting inside the hotel, so Lindros and his father Carl were ushered in a back door, up the freight elevator, through the kitchen and into a conference room to meet the arbitrator. 4 hours later they departed by the same humble route. The 6'5", 230-pound Lindros, at 19 years old the brightest prospect to enter the league since Mario Lemieux in 1984, was being trundled around the hotel like a hamper of towels. The arbitrator ruled on June 30th in favor of Philadelphia. He decreed that a deal is a deal, even if it was sealed by a thumbs up and not in writing. In effect, the arbitrator said the Flyers' thumbs up came before the Rangers. As a result, the Nordiques received 5 players from the Flyers: combative goalie Ron Hextall, D-men Steve Duchesne and Kerry Huffman, and forwards Mike Ricci and Peter Forsberg. Quebec also got Philadelphia's first-round pick in 1993, plus future considerations, and $15 million in cash. In return, the Flyers got a bully with enormous talent, the type of player they hoped would bring them multiple Stanley Cup championships. Lindros' parents Carl and Bonnie got peace of mind after a difficult year in which they were criticized throughout Canada for thumbing their noses at the Nordiques, the NHL draft and Canada's don't rock the boat mentality, and the Rangers got the shaft. It all started at the 1991 draft, in which the Nordiques, by virtue of having the league's worst record, got the first selection and chose Lindros. The pick was a no-brainer. As a junior player, Lindros had been considered the heir to Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky, but Lindros didn't want to play in Quebec. The negatives were the province's oppressive tax structure, its separatist leanings, and Quebec City's small market. Lindros was also put off by the Nordiques' ownership. In perhaps the most premature sports autobiography of all time, Lindros wrote that he didn't see a burning desire to win in the Nordiques organization. But it wasn't as if the Nordiques never wanted to win. They just didn't want to win in 1990-91, when they dressed 54 different players and made a couple of highly dubious deals in order to secure a spot in the league's basement. The Pittsburgh Penguins were accused of doing the same thing the year Lemieux entered the draft. It was these types of shady moves that eventually convinced the NHL to adopt a draft lottery system. After finally becoming convinced that Lindros would never play for his team, Nordiques president and co-owner Marcel Aubut sought to make the best deal he could. Quebec owned Lindros' rights until June 1, 1993, at which time Lindros could re-enter the draft. But Aubut was eager to receive some compensation for Lindros and decided to take advantage of the bargaining atmosphere that surrounds the annual draft week gathering of NHL brass. So he invited offers that included players, draft choices, and cash. On the night of June 19th, no fewer than 7 teams were said to be in the auction for Lindros' rights. The Nordiques went from one team to the next, dangling competing bids in front of rivals from the same division, trying to get each team to sweeten its offer. And the strategy worked. Knowing the Nordiques were close to completing a deal with either the Devils or the Rangers, Philadelphia's president Jay Snyder made a revised offer around 8:30 p.m. The Flyers had missed the playoffs the past 3 years, and Lindros fit the Broad Street mold perfectly: big, tough, hard-hitting, and zealous. At 1 in the morning, Aubut went to Snyder's hotel and presented the deal, which consisted of a list of the Flyers players and draft choices he wanted, plus a demand for $15 million. Meanwhile, Rangers general manager Neil Smith was in the midst of an all-night negotiating session with Pierre Pagé from the Nordiques, which wrapped up at 5 in the morning. At 10:30 that morning, before the Rangers and Flyers had completed their negotiations, Snyder phoned Aubut to say the Flyers would agree to the terms they discussed at 1 a.m. He asked for Lindros' phone number, since the trade hinged on Philadelphia's ability to sign Lindros. The Flyers wanted assurances that Lindros was not only willing to sign but was also willing to sign for longer than 1 year. The Nordiques went to Lindros' agent and asked him to call the Lindroses and get those assurances. But in Aubut's mind, the deal with Philadelphia wasn't done. He wanted to use the Flyers' offer as leverage to pry even more cash from the Rangers. But the Lindroses wanted to talk directly to the Flyers. They wanted assurances that the Flyers would treat Lindros more as a partner than a commodity. Lindros' agent gave the number of the Lindros cottage at Georgian Bay, Ontario to Aubut, who passed it on to Snyder. That would turn out to be Aubut's fatal mistake. Snyder called the Lindroses, and both parties expressed a willingness to negotiate a long-term contract. When Aubut dropped by to see how the phone call had gone, Snyder gave him a thumbs up, described in the arbitrator's report as constantly hurried and agitated. Aubut continued to negotiate with the Rangers, and now he could use the Philly deal as a hammer. At 11:50 a.m., the Rangers agreed to fork over $20 million in cash, along with the players and draft choices on which Smith and Pagé had settled, and Aubut told the Rangers the deal was theirs. Then he went to see Snyder in the Flyers suite, where Aubut claimed the Nordiques board of directors told him to take New York's offer. Meanwhile, the Rangers had made up a sweater with Lindros' name on it and had already begun making plans to hold a press conference. The furious Flyers informed NHL President John Ziegler, and the league quickly decided to appoint an arbitrator. 9 days later, he ruled that the deal was consummated when the Nordiques gave the Flyers Lindros' phone number. Fast forward 14 years, and Eric Lindros played his final NHL shift with the Dallas Stars. After starting his career as one of the most hyped prospects in NHL history, he ended it as a role player in Dallas. As he entered Game 7 of a first-round series against Vancouver, Lindros had conflicting thoughts. He wanted the season to keep going, but he also wanted his career to end. The Stars lost 4-1 and were eliminated from the postseason, and Eric Lindros' career came to an end. At his peak, the 6'4", 240-pound Lindros was one of the most imposing forces in the game's history. He took over the game almost every night, usually from start to finish. The Lindros arsenal may not have been as lethal as Wayne Gretzky, but it was more physically intimidating. He could shoot, stick handle, and set up teammates, and if you weren't looking, he'd hit you so hard you'd feel as if you'd just been run over by a truck. He was in guys' heads before the puck even dropped. They'd be scared to go into the corners. The Flyers' line of Lindros, Leclerc, and Renberg was known as the Legion of Doom. From 1992 to 1999, Lindros averaged 1.39 points per game. And when Gretzky retired in 1999, the 26-year-old Lindros seemed poised to take over the league. But he'd already suffered at least one concussion, on a devastating hit by the Penguins' Darius Kasparaitis in 1998. The Flyers knew so little about concussions that they sent him to a migraine specialist. His 98-99 season had ended shortly after the team was slow to diagnose a collapsed lung after a road game, and Lindros nearly died. The following year was marked by 3 concussions and public disputes between his parents and Flyers general manager Bobby Clarke, notably on matters regarding Lindros' health. When Lindros was getting concussions, the Flyers didn't take them all that seriously, and a year after the collapsed lung, the Flyers stripped Lindros of his captaincy. At times he looked like the old Eric Lindros, but he often felt like a shell of his former self. And it wasn't just on the ice. It was the same when he was driving, or in crowds, or saw bright lights, or heard loud noises. We all know those to be clear symptoms of a concussion now, but we didn't all know that then. Lindros missed the first 16 games of the Flyers' 2000 postseason, and when he returned during the Eastern Conference Finals, the Devils' Scott Stevens leveled him with a shoulder to the head in Game 7. Stevens had exploited one of Lindros' few flaws. He sometimes skated with his head down, leaving him vulnerable to massive hits he didn't see coming. After the collision with Stevens, Lindros was never the same player, and it was his last game as a Flyer. Lindros bounced from Philly to the Rangers to the Maple Leafs to the Stars, hoping to salvage his career with a Stanley Cup. By the time he got to Dallas, Lindros had become the kind of player he used to intimidate. He avoided contact and found himself looking up at the clock during practice, counting down the time until it was over. These days, Lindros plays rec hockey with some buddies. No checking, no worries. He thinks most hockey should be played that way. A generation ago, it was hard to fathom Lindros, the once powerful force, preaching against hitting. But he knows better than most the folly of mistaking size for invincibility. Now Lindros works with See the Line, an organization focused on concussion education, and helping doctors raise money for the Concussion Project, a research initiative at Western University in London, Ontario. He's determined to improve standards for brain care, with more comprehensive mandatory training for teachers and coaches, and clearer lines of communication amongst all parties involved in an athlete's career. Even though Lindros hates revisiting the past, history has vindicated him in some ways. Marcel Aubou's reputation was later destroyed. He was forced to resign as president of the Canadian Olympic Committee in 2015 after he was accused of sexual harassment. And the Nordiques moved to Denver in 1995. As for fans who think Lindros doesn't like French Canadians, they should know that he's married to one. Today's fans have a better understanding that players have rights and that you can cheer manically for your local sports team business, but it's still a business. In 2005, the Penguins drafted Sidney Crosby first overall. As hockey fans know, Crosby missed months at a time because of concussions, but reasonable people never questioned his desire to play. If anything, you'd hear people worrying about Crosby returning too fast. Concussions are part of the Crosby story, just as they were part of Lindros's, but it's a different ending, which makes Lindros happy. That's all for this look back at the Eric Lindros trade. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe to support the channel.